Meanwhile, back in this country, we have the attempt to push a discharge petition, which would have allowed a handful of moderate Republicans and the Democratic Party to push a bill to the floor that would have protected DACA recipients. That failed because when we talk about a handful of moderate Republicans, we're talking about virtually none. And they could not find enough to get that through a discharge position. And we have Paul Ryan priming to bring up an immigration bill next week that is written by anti-immigration folks. And so we will see what happens with that. In the meantime, Jeff Sessions announced this week that they will no longer, the U.S. government will no longer consider victims of domestic abuse in countries where there is no protection for victims of domestic abuse, and victims of gang violence where there is no capacity to protect people from gang violence are no longer legitimate asylum candidates. This, of course, coming from the huge brewing scandal that the U.S. government is separating children from their parents when they come to the border and ask for asylum in this country. In other words, these are not people who have entered illegally. They are people who are following the letter of the law, and then they're having their children ripped from their arms and, some type of punishment for deigning to ask for asylum based upon the legal outlines, which is not to say that it's any more legit to do this to people who have crossed the border without documentation. But this is really just stunning.
Well, I don't know, I don't know how else you can interpret this other than, this is fascist policy. It just is. And this is Jeff Sessions base essentially. And now they're talking about building camps to house as many as 5,000 children, tent cities.
Let's be clear what these are, too. These are not tent cities. Tents describe the housing. These are concentration camps.
That's right. Where you want to, literally concentrate people into one place. That is their whole point, is trying to put them all into one camp and keep them there. And we're talking about children, many of whom are under the age of 12. Some of them are even infants. So, we're talking about, this is really un-American. This is, even in our worst days, this is way up there with some of the worst stuff that we've done, as far as I'm concerned, even going back, into the previous centuries. This is a very, very ugly, ugly policy. And this is just being done by the Department of Justice under Jeff Sessions, who is ordering this zero-tolerance policy for anyone crossing the border, and saying you are subject to prosecution as a criminal if you cross the border illegally. And those who come and attempt to get asylum, they will be separated from their children. They will go through a rushed process. And by the way, if it turns out that their asylum claim is denied, they too will be prosecuted for attempting to enter the country illegally. That's a catch-22 that you can't even believe. It's Kafkaesque. Right. It's unbelievable. And meanwhile, kids are being ripped from their parents' arms. And this is documented. It's not hyperbole. This is actually happening. And this is part of, this is, as far as I'm concerned, I think Jeff Sessions is doing this because he means it. He is anti-immigrant across the board. Indeed, if you look at the bill that Paul Ryan is going to put forth in the new bill after the discharge petition failed, it takes a hard whack at legal immigration too. So this isn't just about somebody being illegal or, asking for asylum, in a way that isn't legitimate. This is just anti-immigrant. It's just, we don't want foreigners in this country. We don't care where you're from. We don't care why you want to come here. You get out. You're not coming in anymore. That is what they're saying. It is just pure, rank xenophobia and racism, as far as I'm concerned. These are people coming from what Trump calls whole countries, and they don't want them here. And that's Jeff Sessions. He truly believes that. I mean, that is an essential belief. I think that on the part of many of these Republicans, many of whom also believe it, but they also think that they have to do this because their rabid xenophobic base that's been ginned up by Trump even beyond the place where they were before, which was already pretty bad, that they have to do it for the midterms. So this is an absolute, just a cynical and disgusting attempt to gin up more and more hate and division in our country at the expense of mothers and their children and families. They're just trying to live. They're not doing anything wrong. They're other than just trying to get a job and work. I mean, and the fact that this is happening here as Trump is over in North Korea kissing a brutal dictator's ring,
right?
The whole thing. This is just an ugly, ugly period.
I mean, let's be clear too. Brutal dictator. The man's a serial killer. I mean, he literally has killed his brother, his uncle, a whole host of people around him by numerous means. Let me ask you this, and what we're talking about here is it's not just un-American. It really is inhuman, and it is a policy specifically to terrorize these people coming to seek asylum, and basically saying to people who are being, beaten, in their homes or are afraid to get killed, and in some instances are being killed by gangs that exist in these countries, don't even come and ask us. And if you do so, you're going to suffer. You're going to suffer if you ask us, and you're going to suffer in increasingly unimaginable ways. Where is the American public? I mean, we had people who went to protests, and maybe it was because it was so specific during the Muslim bans, but we have not seen the American public responding in any material way to this. And I want to take a break. I want to ask you that question when we return. We have a lot of other stories to talk about, and maybe that's part of the answer, frankly. Yeah. But it's super disturbing to see, we can't see where this leads, but we can see where this begins. And this beginning is very similar to some other very horrific beginnings we have seen through history in terms of fascism, in terms of all sorts of horrific things in our human history. And so I'll ask you that question when we return. We'll talk about some other stories as well. I'm Sam Seder. This is Ring of Fire Radio. I'm talking to the great Digby. We'll be right back.